personal experience that way would be very helpful.
That's hard to do, but I'll make a stab at it. I don't think the change is quite as dramatic as it seems. I mean, when I was in government, that's a long time ago, and people don't remember I was highly criticized for opposing the death penalty and for refusing to use wiretapping and for refusing to prosecute Stokely Carmichael. Over 100 congressmen once signed a petition that I should be removed if I didn't prosecute Stokely Carmichael, and my statement was, we don't prosecute except on facts, not at the political request of some member of the Congress. I told Mayor Daley that if he ordered people to shoot looters, he was ordering murder, and he would be prosecuted for it, as would anyone who shot a looter, because you cannot use excessive deadly force like that. And even in a case like the Spock case, I urged Judge Ford not to give a jail sentence, because a jail sentence makes no sense. Why do you put a baby doctor who cares about life and peace in jail? It may not mean that he didn't violate the law technically. I had opposed the war at that time, as was generally known, so that during the campaign of 1968, Richard Nixon, at his acceptance speech in Miami, said the first thing he was going to do was get a new attorney general. Now, I have to explain all that so it doesn't seem as if I were, a flinty-eyed prosecutor when I was attorney general and changed over completely. In 1969, right after I got out of the government, I was speaking in Faneuil Hall in Boston and places like that in opposition to the war, but I really wasn't saying anything that I hadn't been saying before. I just didn't. The difference was that in 1967, 1968, what I was heard saying was about civil rights, about the Voting Rights Act, about the open housing statute, about the riots in the cities and things like that, because that was my area primarily of responsibility. I spent 3 or 4 months in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, for instance, in whatever year it was, 1971 or 2, the Harrisburg trial, representing Philip Berrigan, Elizabeth McAllister, and others, and since have, represented defendants in the Attica trials from the Attica Prison Rebellion, and president of student body at Kent State. Plowshares 8 trial is a uniquely important and interesting case. It's a case about survival and love. There's no question about the facts. The question is whether the communication of the spirit of the defendants can reach the people. There's no claim here that they've acted from greed, from materialism, from lust, from the causes that we usually associate with what we call crime, the 7 deadly sins or something like that. They've acted in a totally selfless way from love. What else? They've given their time, their energy, their lives, their imagination, their families, enormous sacrifice, because they believe that the nuclear arms race threatens life on Earth. I think they're right. The question is whether we have the vision and the courage and the compassion to see it. And they try to tell us that in a non-violent way. They're a gently strong people. So it seems to me a fundamentally important case. I hope we'll all think a whole lot about it.
Do you see any parallels between the violence that took place yesterday and the possibility of violence in terms of nuclear war? What I'm trying to point out is it seemed to me like it was a that one of the basic points of this trial, or the position that the defense had made, is that if you prepare for violence, you eventually enact violence. And in actual fact, what happened yesterday, it seemed to me anyway, was that the police had prepared for violence in the name of defense or defending the peace, but in actual fact created a violent situation. So it was almost as if it was a microcosm of what's being stated on nuclear level.
We see it again and again. I've said so many times I get tired of hearing it myself, but every major riot in the 1960s until the murder of Martin Luther King grew out of a police incident. The Walsh riots, the two young men were arrested by county police who had no jurisdiction at the place, and they were hassling them on the street, and an angry crowd came around. The Newark riots, a cab driver, a black cab driver, was accused of bumping a police car. Not many people really do that, do they? And he was dragged 3 blocks to a precinct station. A big angry crowd followed him. The Detroit riots began when the police decided early one Sunday morning to raid what they call a blind pig, an after-hours place that had been going for years. And they were dragging people out. And so that's, in microcosm, as you say, we saw that sort of tension yesterday. It's people unwilling to say, I wonder why they're doing this, these demonstrators. I wonder why they're holding this vigil. I wonder what they want to say. I wonder if there's possibly any truth to it, any rationality to it, anything that might help me. Instead, they react in anger. Now we see the same thing today. President Reagan's been talking about Cuba responsible for El Salvador, as if we never sent any guns to El Salvador, and responsible for Angola, as if we hadn't tried to overthrow this government in 1975 and 6. This has been well documented in John Stockwell's book, In Search of Enemies. In other words, we're looking for enemies is what his book is about, as if we don't have enough problems. So the Reagan administration has been saying about Cuba, we're going to blockade them and cut them off. Well, what choice does Cuba have then? In the morning paper, we see Brezhnev from the Soviet Union with President Castro saying we'll support the Cubans, so we're taking sides. And the potential for violence in a situation like that is just stunning, and it's absolutely unnecessary. It is unpardonable for a president to heat up international tensions with childish rhetoric like that.
Do you think that there's any hope, in a certain sense, for our culture? We seem to be particularly hung up on maintaining the American dream, which seems to be based on America is the greatest country in the world. America is the best. America can, therefore, pretty much do what it wants to do. It seems to me that there has to be some kind of change in that attitude. But I don't know what your perspective is.
Well, America has some uniqueness. Part is, and the part that I like the best, we're so many different peoples. I mean, to me, the richness of humanity is not its sameness, but its variety. And we have a bigger mixture of more different kinds of people from more different places and more different colors of skin and all the rest than anything else. And that's beautiful. That is terrific. But somehow or other, the richness of the land and all, and the way we came to the land, we came here with violence. And we pursued the native peoples and disregarded their culture and their lives and their children and virtually destroyed them. And we finally developed 2 values that are terribly dangerous. The first is violence. America today, if you think about it, glorifies the power of violence. My God, when you think of our defense budget, when we look at our evening TV, when you read our newspapers, we're consumed with interest in violence. And we really see good in the gun. But there's no good in the gun. The gun's just a way to kill people. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. We have glorified the power of violence and we've ignored its pity. The other great problem that I think we have in our values is materialism. We love things. God, we love things, you know. It's Mark Twain's proved the prophet again that civilization is nothing but the proliferation of unnecessary necessities. We're constantly told to buy more things, to want more things, until finally there's no value, there's no philosophy, there's no morality that is important. All you want is a new toaster, you know, or a new car. And what are you going to do with it? And what's it really have to do with joy in life, with happiness, with understanding? So it seems to me that what we really need is to address, and most people are as unaware of their values as they are the air they breathe, you know. We have to address how violence has overtaken us. We all want to be John Wayne. And we've got to address how materialism is consumist. We all want to be millionaires. We want to be rich. We don't worry about hungry people. There are people that are starving on earth right now. There are infants and little children with bloated bellies and, and arms and legs that look like twigs. And we want more things. We need to think about that. And when you think about it, the Plowshares' Aid are exactly into that. They are absolutely unwanting people. They wear old beat-up clothes, and they don't have automobiles, and they don't want money, and they eat leftovers for meals, and they enjoy life. And they believe in what they're doing, and finally nothing's worthwhile if you don't.
Mr. Clark, you're a lawyer, of course, a very good one, and your function here at this trial as a lawyer, using the tools of your craft within the system which is now trying these people, and your defense of them, I assume, will have to be in terms of the defenses available to you within the system. Can you describe, please, what your plans are and what your legal theories are in their defense?
Well, first I have to say that the defendants are really representing themselves. And that's quite important to them, and it's quite important to the truth of what they're about. Their purpose is their message. They don't need a mouthpiece. They don't want a mouthpiece. They're somewhat impatient with technicalities and rules that limit any form of speech because they see that really as inhibiting the distribution or dissemination of truth. And they really want to speak for themselves. They want their lives to speak for themselves. So as a lawyer here, I'm not playing a role that I've ever really played before. All I'm really doing is advising and consulting with them. But I can help them translate into legal theories their spiritual values, so that they won't. It won't be so difficult for the court to understand what they're trying to say and what they're trying to do. Now, among the things that will be involved are the questions that come up in the area of conscience, for instance. Does the American jury reflect the conscience of the community? Does the individual juror have an obligation to act on conscience? What do we do to jurors if we force them in a judicial proceeding that has the name justice on the door to violate their own conscience? If you touch the conscience of others in a case like this, where there's no dispute in the facts, I mean, they damage the nose cones. They enter the General Electric plant because they want humanity, life on Earth, to prevail. If an individual juror can't use conscience, what does that mean to our system? It means it's not a free system, because conscience is the basis for free choice. And if they do act on conscience, then what's it mean in terms of the possibility of communicating their message? It opens the doors enormously. Next, there's this fundamental question. Hugo Grotius, who wrote the first modern book 400 years ago on the law of war and peace, said that the purpose of all law is this care to preserve society. Now, fundamental in all law is the notion that an act that may be a technical violation in and of itself and in isolation is not only permitted but required of a citizen when it will prevent a much greater evil. Now compare the act of entering a war plant or entering a concentration camp where people are being exterminated and seeking to prevent the extermination of the people, or the manufacture of weapons that cannot be used in consistent patterns with international law because they're genocidal. There's no way you can use a nuclear bomb against combatants alone because there's no place where there are only combatants that's that big. The nuclear weapon has to kill everybody. It kills the babies, it kills the elderly, it kills those there who oppose the government, those who support the government. It kills people of all religions and all races. It kills all life in the area. It's genocidal. It cannot be addressed to combatants. It's illegal. The bomb is unlawful. Now that's part of the theory. And the other part of the theory is the part I was mentioning earlier, that their act in technical violation is so insignificant in comparison with the evil that they seek to prevent, the construction and imminent use of a nuclear weapon, that it is, the law says justified. I think it's more than justified. I really think it's necessity. I think moral people who care about society have, of necessity, the obligation to prevent that.
When you refer to the bomb as unlawful, do you mean morally unlawful or legally unlawful?
Well, I mean both. When law splits from morality, it's law in name only, as Thomas Aquinas said. It's an empty shell that becomes dangerous to society because it coerces the people through its own police to do things or not do things that moral conduct would require or prohibit. And therefore the law can never prevail if it digresses very far from moral principle. But you know, the law of war, if you want to call it that, it's a contradiction in terms to me, but the law of war prohibits the destruction of non-combatants. Doesn't it have to? I mean, you can't survive if you permit the wanton destruction of all life. We used to think of civilians, but how can you use you know, conceivably with small tactical nuclear weapons, but the Mark 12A is a multiple, independently targeted reentry vehicle that has a number of nuclear bombs in it, each with a capacity many times greater for destruction than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima or Nagasaki. And there's no way that those bombs can be restricted. We're talking about genocide. We're talking about wiping out whole cities. And we ought to come to our senses, and we ought to recognize that through the history of law, that has been prohibited.
Do you think you'll be able to get the judge in the Plowshare trial to feel as you do about these greater principles? In court on Monday morning, we were speaking about Section XYZ of the Pennsylvania Penal Law, and we didn't seem to want to go beyond that. Do you have hope of making them aware of other principles?
I think the defendants are not so interested in the judge alone. They're not afraid of conviction. I mean, if they were afraid of conviction, they would have stood in bed. They didn't have to go to King of Prussia. They didn't have to do what they did. Their passionate concern is to communicate to the world, to you and me, and not just to this judge. But I think the judge won't be able to sit in that courtroom without learning a lot. These are driven people. It's good to see driven people, people who really care about something, who believe and act in faith. And You'll see, I mean, just as a technical legal matter, that the Pennsylvania Code, first he only read the general section. He didn't read the specific sections that relate, and the statutes do apply to this conduct. That doesn't mean that the factual determination doesn't have to be made, but the Pennsylvania Criminal Code specifically provides a defense it calls justification, which is what I've just been talking about. And it covers this sort of situation. It covers acts against property of the type that we've described. But in addition, there is a common law tradition and an international law tradition that is incorporated into the domestic laws of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania by Article 6 of our United States Constitution, which makes those treaties and international provisions the supreme law of our land. What time is it getting to be?
25 to 10.
Oh, I've got to go. Oh, yeah, I've got to go. Yeah, it's because it's 9. I'm supposed to be there at 9:30.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you, thank you.